My husband's mistress screamed that I poisoned him with meatloaf, so I dumped it from an urn onto the funeral home carpet. I was standing at my husband's funeral trying to look appropriately devastated when his mistress burst through the doors of the funeral home screaming that I was a murderer. I'd never actually seen Linda from accounting in person before, but the way she sobbed about my meatloaf while calling my husband her everything confirmed this was definitely the woman I'd been expecting. She pointed at me in front of his entire family and screamed, "You killed him with that meatloaf! You found out about us and you murdered him! I have proof you poisoned him and I'm not letting you get away with it." This whole mess started the Monday before when my husband came home looking terrible and finally confessed he'd been having an affair with Linda from accounting who'd been calling in sick for 3 weeks straight. But that wasn't even the worst part. He pulled up a video on his laptop and after 30 years of marriage, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I told him not to worry because I knew exactly what to do. Tuesday night, I made my famous meatloaf for dinner, which my husband always said was rich enough to kill someone, and we sat at the table barely touching our food while I explained what was going to happen next. I spent the rest of the night grinding up that meatloaf and stuffing it in an old urn from our basement. By Wednesday morning, everything had changed, and by Thursday, Linda was making panicked calls to everyone at his office saying she needed to see him urgently, but couldn't find him. She'd even shown up at our house Thursday night banging on the door, but I just sat in the dark eating ice cream watching through the people until she left. The whole room went silent, and my mother actually stepped away from me while my sister pulled her kids behind her, like I might start poisoning people right there in the funeral home. Linda pulled out her phone showing everyone text messages where my husband complained about stomach pains after dinner and selfies of him looking pale. She had timestamps on everything showing he'd gotten sick exactly 6 hours after eating my meatloaf, which she said was the exact time frame for the type of poison she suspected I'd used. Her private investigator started telling everyone about my suspicious grocery store purchases and how I'd bought 3 packages of ground beef when I usually only bought 1, and the cashier said I'd seemed nervous and kept checking my phone. He pulled out a poster board timeline showing my movements that day, with red circles around what he called critical evidence. Linda was screaming that I'd killed him because I'd discovered their affair, and she pulled out a recording of my husband saying, "My wife is going to kill me." The investigator said I'd been reading true crime forums about undetectable poisons and deleted my browser history the night my husband died. My mother-in-law was sobbing, and my brother-in-law actually called 911 while Linda dropped to her knees in front of the urn, wailing about how they were going to run away to Costa Rica together by Christmas and start their dream business selling handmade jewelry on the beach. She kissed what looked like a gumball machine ring and screamed that I was a monster who murdered him because I couldn't stand to see him happy with another woman. And that's when I decided I'd heard enough. I stayed completely calm and walked over to the display table where my husband's urn was sitting, surrounded by white roses, and reached behind it to pull out a second urn that I'd hidden there that morning. Everyone started murmuring because who brings 2 urns to a funeral, and my mother-in-law actually gasped and asked if I'd killed someone else too. I looked directly at Linda and said, "You want to know about the meatloaf that killed my husband? Well, Linda from accounting, this is the meatloaf." Then I opened the urn and dumped the contents all over the funeral home carpet, and it was literally just ground up frozen meatloaf. While everyone was staring at the pile of meat on the floor and the funeral director was having what looked like a mild stroke, the doors burst open and my husband walked in, completely alive and wearing the same suit he'd supposedly been cremated in. The entire room gasped and Linda's face went from triumph to confusion to absolute terror in 3 seconds. He looked directly at her and said, "Hello, Linda. I believe you have something that belongs to my company." That's when 2 police officers followed him through the door with their handcuffs already out. Linda just stood there with her mouth open for 10 seconds before shrieking, "But I watched you get cremated. I saw it." My husband laughed and said, "You watched a YouTube video called Peaceful Cremation Process on the TV in the viewing room, and you didn't even notice the ad for a funeral home in Nebraska." The police explained to everyone that Linda had embezzled $400,000 from my husband's company over 2 years, and they'd been trying to arrest her for weeks, but she'd been hiding. As they were putting the handcuffs on her, she screamed, "But that money was ours. He said I was special. What's his is mine." And my husband said, "Linda, we've been over for 6 months, and you kept sending me love letters saying we were meant to be together while I've been responding with please contact HR ever since I tried to end it." The detective thanked us for getting her to finally show up somewhere they could grab her, and I looked at the ground meatloaf on the carpet and thought that this was definitely getting 5 stars in my recipe book.